You are the second person from Staten Island that's sitting on this couch.
Who was the other person?
My friend Joanne Pucciarelli.
There's a Staten Island name.
Italian, if you didn't know.
Yes, totally.
I love representing the boroughs. Because everyone thinks of New York City as Manhattan. There's so much more to that.
There is.
So we talked a little bit about Staten Island, but can you explain your experiences growing up there?
I grew up feeling like an outsider, but not knowing why.
Okay.
I just knew I didn't really kind of fit in with the culture there. So I became like a new wave kid, like an alternative music lunatic, basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until I went away to college where I was like, oh, there's like a big world out here.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting. You live in Queens now, which is a melting pot for all the cultures.
Oh, it's so completely different. And my kids' experience is just so wonderful and different.
Was that your way of getting it all out?
I didn't realize it could be a career. Like it never occurred to me. My childhood dreams, I wanted to be like weird things like a dermatologist or...
It's not weird.
Yeah, and then my mom she was like, you're really good at math, you should go into engineering because women in engineering, like she was saying this in the, early 80s and she was so right.
Smart.
That I could have gotten a free ride probably to a college.
I'm actually intrigued
on an engineering thing.
You have a good math mind
I do.
And you're a writer.
Yeah.
You're one of those.
I'm one of those.
Yeah, that's impressive. You can rule the world.
Yes, and I like when I'm writing a book and I reach the point where it starts to feel mathematical. Like I reach the point where I know that there are certain pieces that need to get plugged in and then it's going to be complete.
Wow.
It feels like a math...
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What are some of your early storytelling influences when you were younger?
I don't know. I mean, I know that just in my family, it was like a big, an Irish Catholic family where my grandfather was always telling bad jokes and my grandparents would always tell crazy stories and stuff. So there was like a storytelling kind of persona built into the family.
Yeah.
And I used to, I read, but not like a crazy reader. Like my daughter now, she's like reading like 50 books a summer and stuff. And I wasn't like that when I was a teenager.
Interesting.
But I did I loved Judy Blume. I loved things that really spoke directly to me.
Yes.
So it wasn't until I was a lot older and, in college, read more widely than I ever had. So kind of discovered what I really liked. And then I started working after college, doing proofreading and working for publishing houses. And I started reading, then I was writing flap copy, like book jackets.
Wow.
So I had to read all these manuscripts and then make them sound good.
Yeah.
And I was like, most of these books are not very good. I was like, I could do that. So then I decided to start writing.
Did you have a teacher that was like, you're incredible?
Well, my senior year of college, I took a nonfiction writing class as an elective.
Okay.
Otherwise, I studied American government. I didn't study English or anything.
Sure.
And I wrote an essay in that class, and he was like, this is really good. You should try to get this published. So that was when I started realizing that stuff that I was writing, diary-esque kind of stuff, that there was a market for it.
Yes.
So I wrote a couple of little essays for Mademoiselle and 17 when I was in my 20s.
Oh, yeah.
Before magazines disappeared.
R.I.P.
Yeah. And then I just kept following different these novels, maybe I should write a novel. And then I signed up for writing classes at Gotham Writers Workshops for a year. Yeah. And just learned how the craft works, learned why I liked the books that I liked, and learned everything that was wrong with what I was writing, because I just didn't understand some basics. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up being hired as a teacher for Gotham Writers Workshops after a year or so.
Okay.
And then everything has kind of flowed from there.
It's wild.
Yeah.
You have a daughter who loves to read. I have one too.
Yeah.
Just can't get enough.
No, and she's buying books constantly. Yeah. And I'm like, there are libraries. Please, can we go to the library?
I know. Why do they feel like they have to buy them all?
She's like, I need it on my shelf.
Yeah. Yeah. She'll return to books she loves.
Yeah,
she'll
read them twice. They annotate. Yeah.
So do you think she'll follow in your footsteps?
I don't know. She's a really good storyteller. During the pandemic, she was little, but we had an idea. I think she came up with it, actually. Retelling fairy tales from the point of view of their pets.
Oh, that's the cutest thing.
So we called it Furry Tale. And we wrote a book together. We sat side by side because she was not
Did you
doing
publish
well.
it?
No, we tried to get it published. My agent loved it.
What happened?
Nobody bought it.
That's not okay.
I'm still not giving up on it.
I say don't. There's something there.
Yeah, there's something there. Publishing is weird. You never know what's going to happen.
Seriously, we are talking about writing because you literally wrote over a dozen novels. I don't even understand how you start that. Do you think of this major idea and have the strategy and see it through? This is a multiple books, and I want to retell this story. I want to keep going, or does it just naturally keep moving along? How does that happen for someone who's not a writer?
You mean
the process
of writing one book, or
starting with one book and then continuing?
I don't know. It's every time you write a book, you kind of feel like maybe this is the last idea you're going to have, and it feels like the book you're meant to write, and then you finish it. Usually, before you finish it, the next idea starts popping up.
Okay.
And you want to abandon what you're working on because it's like really annoying at that point, because you have to actually finish it.
Yes.
So it's like you get this shiny new idea, and you're like, that's the book that I really want to write.
Yes.
And that just for me has kept happening. Yeah.
Wow. And you primarily focus on young adult, and they say middle grade, middle school?
Yeah, middle grade. Yeah.
Middle grade.
Yeah.
Why that demographic?
Just because probably watching like my kids go through certain phases of development, it's been interesting to want to write about that experience.
Sure.
And yeah, I don't know. It's just I had written a couple of young adult novels, and then I was like, oh, people are doing cool stuff in middle grade. What would I write about if I wrote a middle grade novel? And then I had an idea from my own experience when I was kind of bullied by these horrible girls on my street.
Sure.
On Staten Island, and I was like, that could be a fun book.
Wow.
Yeah.
My daughter's already looked at your list and started ordering.
Oh, good.
Seriously. She's like excited.
Good.
Excited that she hasn't read some of them yet, because she reads everything.
Right.
Do you think New York City kids have a different coming of age experience than kids living elsewhere?
Yes, I do.
Explain.
For my kids, it's really just being exposed to so many different kinds of people.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of living in like a small town that feels a lot more homogenous, even if it's not, you have to maybe work harder to find different kinds of people in certain smaller towns. Whereas in New York City, it's like you walk out the door and everything is kind of wild and different.
Right.
And I do think that New York City kids, maybe this is your experience too, they grow up faster.
They do.
They just seem like they're more mature. Like I've been taking my high school senior to college auditions, and you look at the other kids in the room and you can kind of tell who's a New York kid. They just like have this kind of air about them. Maybe it's because they have like their subway face. They have to have like...
I think they also think they're awesome, which is okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. I want that.
Yeah.
I think they learn independence quicker. We trust them. They are doing things earlier than others. That does, encourage confidence and resilience, right?
Absolutely.
It has to.
Yeah, and I think it's great.
Yeah. Do you think that this impacted the way you wrote your young characters? Through that creative
I'm not sure.
lens?
It's interesting because growing up on Staten Island, so when I'm like pulling from my own experience, Staten Island felt like more of a suburb. So I don't have the same kind of city experience as people who lived in Manhattan do.
True.
But I do, so I've written a bunch of books that are kind of like in generic suburbs, just because those are kind of easy settings, because it's familiar to so many readers and you don't have to build the world as specifically. But then I decided to write a novel set in Astoria with 4 teenagers, and I had to make them diverse, because otherwise, who would write a book where there's like 4 white people in Astoria? So I created this kind of really interesting, diverse cast that I was really nervous about, because, when you're just writing from your own kind of experience and you try to write people of other backgrounds, it can get really complicated. But
and you want to be careful.
Yeah, but in the reviews of the book were basically saying that like it was really well done, and so that was exciting to write something that was in my, I've been in Astoria for 20 years now, so it feels like home.
Yeah.
So it was fun to write a book.
What book was that?
That's called Take Me With You. That was my book that came out during the pandemic when bookstores were closed.
Okay.
So it bombed, which was unfortunate because it's, I think, a really good book.
We're going to order it.
Okay.
We're going to read it, yeah.
It's about a group of kids. They find this creepy device. It's like a cube when they're all kind of summoned to detention at their high school. And the cube starts giving them weird instructions.
Okay.
And they all kind of, they don't know each other very well, but they're all kind of tasked with taking care of this weird device that's increasingly menacing.
Yeah.
In their lives.
Got a bit of a Breakfast Club detention
yeah, kind
feel.
Of AI Breakfast Club.
Yeah, the modernized.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, is there any New York City spot that resonated with you so deeply that shows up in your books?
You do know the answer. Is the answer Coney Island?
Yes.
Yes.
And I have to be honest with you, and I'm calling myself out. I've never been.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I don't know
Come
why
on,
I did
let's
this.
go.
Let's
right
go.
now.
We'll be back. Pause. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself and admitting this. It is on my list, and every year it just. And I have 3 children.
I think I have to leave.
I know
I'm
you
so
do.
Sorry.
I know you think less of me, and I respect that. I respect that.
So I should, though. I'll admit that I didn't grow up going to Coney Island. Like, I remember my parents maybe took us there once.
All right, that makes me feel a little better.
Yes.
Thank you.
We were a Jersey Shore family.
Yeah, okay.
So my grandparents had a house down there, so that was like our annual vacation. Lavallette?
Yeah.
Favorite town?
Yeah, awesome.
Yes. But when I was in my 20s, I had this friend. I lived in Brooklyn for 10 years in my 20s into 30s, and we were talking about going to Coney Island together, and he came by my apartment, and I like went downstairs, and he was like, "What are you doing? Where's your swimsuit and stuff?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?"
He's like, Coney Island to people.
He's like, "We're going to Coney Island. Like, it's a beach." To me, Coney Island was like walking on the boardwalk and going on rides, like in my head.
Right.
But he was like, "We're going swimming," and it never occurred to me.
Because there's that, and then there's aquariums. There's just a lot,
Yeah,
and
I thought there's plenty to do. Right? Yeah.
Right.
So off we go to Coney Island, and we go swimming, and it was this magical day for me because I'm in the water.
Yeah, it's pretty special.
After just hopping on a subway.
Yeah, I
And then I'm
know.
riding home on the train with sandy feet and a wet swimsuit under my clothes. And it just really changed my idea of New York City.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of started becoming obsessed with the history of Coney Island and how the crazy amusement parks.
Right.
Midget cities,
Right.
like really crazy, awful stuff. And,
Yes.
you know, they electrocuted some elephants out there.
Did not know that.
Yeah, like just really fascinating history, and all these, you know, the theme parks had these crazy rides, like a trip to the moon and a journey through hell. It was just wild stuff, and I was like, I have to write a book about this. So I wrote a book called Dreamland Social Club, which is about a girl who inherits her late mother's house on Coney Island and moves there with her dad, and they're kind of sad in their lives, and the girl is hopeful that this is going to be like a kind of feeling like she's coming home, and she ends up joining, like hearing about this mysterious club called the Dreamland Social Club, and all the members are kind of these freaks, like a giant and a dwarf and a tattooed person and a girl with a beard, like circus freak kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And she discovers that her mom actually founded the club when she was in high school there, and it's this whole journey. So that book is so meaningful to me. My husband and I met through kind of friends who shoved us together. And our first date, we went to Coney Island together.
You did?
And we ended up getting engaged on the Wonder Wheel.
That's amazing. It's a really special place for you.
Yeah, it is.
Like different moments in your life.
Totally.
That's really cool.
And during the pandemic, my husband, he was in a band back in the day. And
Really?
Yes, which is part of how we met. It was caught up in me going to see his band and becoming obsessed with one of his songs.
Aww.
And then I wrote his lyrics.
You were a groupie.
I was a groupie. And then I wrote some of his lyrics into a book I was writing at the time. And I just thought I'd change them later, but when I was done, I didn't want to change them, so I emailed him.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, hey, I wrote this crazy book, and I used some of your lyrics. And he was like, can I read the manuscript? And so he read the book, and then we went on a date.
What book was this?
This book was my first novel, and it was for adults.
Right.
But it was called Love Will Tear Us Apart, and it was kind of a dark but satire about a pair of conjoined twin pop stars.
Okay, how do you get these incredible ideas?
Okay, so I was obsessed with these twins, the Hilton twins, who were conjoined twins in the vaudeville kind of era. For some reason, there was a little poster of them hanging in the basement of my childhood home, Daisy and Violet Hilton.
We need to understand why.
My dad can't even explain why
just was
we
there.
had it.
Okay.
It was just there.
Yeah, okay.
So I was obsessed with them, and something had happened, I think, in the world, like conjoined twins had been born.
Oh, yeah.
And it's always in the news.
Yes.
And this was around the time that Britney Spears was big. And I happened to hear Britney on the radio singing Hit Me Baby One More Time. And
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She sang the line, "My loneliness is killing me." And for some reason, I had conjoined twins on my mind, and I was like, that would be so funny if conjoined twins were pop stars singing about loneliness. And then it just went from there.
Your mind is incredible. And you're like, and a book. You're amazing.
Yeah. So then I decided, so it's from the point of view of a single woman in her 30s who's a celebrity journalist.
Right.
And I was single in my 30s, at the early 30s at this time. And she's hired to write their biography.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So she moves in with them, and she has this whole thing.
Yeah.
So
I think my daughter has The Leaving on her list.
Yeah.
Oh, she's like, yes, she's excited about that one.
Okay, so The Leaving is my most popular book by
I didn't know
that. Outsold.
Oh, that's so interesting.
All the other books combined.
Why do you think it resonates so deeply with?
I think it's just a creepy premise. So when my older daughter, who's now a high school senior, when she was in kindergarten, she was going to sleep, and I was tucking her in and saying goodnight, and then she said to me, "I'm going on a trip tomorrow." And I was like, I knew she wasn't.
Right.
I was like, but I was curious. I was like, "Where are you going?" And she said, "We're going to The Leaving. We're all going."
Oh my gosh.
And I was like,
You're like, I'll be right back.
All the hairs on I was like, what? And then I was just like, okay, good night. And I went downstairs to my husband, and I was like, Ellie just said the creepiest thing. She said that her and her friends are all going to The Leaving. And I was like, oh, yeah, she said the man on the playground said we're all going to The Leaving.
Okay.
Yeah, it was worse than that, yeah.
That's worse.
And my husband was like, oh, she's super tired and whatever.
That's such a dad thing to say.
Yeah.
And you're like,
but he was right. In the morning, she didn't really remember saying it, because over breakfast, I'm like, hey, so what did you mean?
She's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, she didn't remember. Anyway, I became obsessed with then.
So it's literally ideas from living your everyday life that sparks something, and then your mind just...
Yep. And that idea took a really long time to become what it became, which is a story of 6 kids who disappear when they're in kindergarten, and then years later, only 5 of them come back.
Right.
And
they don't
remember.
Yes.
They don't remember their childhood, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did all this research into memory science and learned about how we only really remember 3% of our life or something crazy. And this was around the time where my kids were about to, go into real school things, where I realized I was going to have less control over their day to day.
Interesting. I had that moment too.
Yeah. And
do you think every mom has that moment?
I don't know. Probably.
You do?
Yeah.
The control part, not even in a negative way. The part where you can't.
I think you realize that
their environment safe.
Yeah, exactly. True. And then worrying about thinking back on my own elementary school and middle school years, and some of it not being great, but also realizing how little I remembered of it. You have flashes of.
It's kind of how I explain to people when the kids are little, they won't remember this moment that they're having so much fun with you, but they'll remember feeling safe.
Yes.
Or liking you. Yeah. Or loving you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things.
Totally.
So I had a good childhood. I don't know. I didn't love it.
Yeah.
Without
I had a great childhood, in my home. I had a happy family life. And I had good friends and stuff, but I also remember just being picked on a lot and some evil girls and stuff in middle school, which, you know, it turns out my kids are not having that experience at all.
That's great.
They have floated above any kind of like drama.
No tough time in middle school
not
ever?
Really. No, well, the older one was in the pandemic. She, you know, 7th grade ended, but she was also in an all-girls leadership school where it's like you're not going to get as much of the drama.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and then my younger one, yeah, she's just having a great middle school experience.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe it's also where you're from, where you're living, where you're raising your kids.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or I think the culture has changed too, and kids are not.
I agree. And
as
schools
mean
are
because
not putting up with things anymore
exactly.
either.
And they're really taught to be more kind and empathetic in a way that certainly wasn't part of the curriculum.
No, back in the day.
No.
No, there was no curriculum. You're an overachiever because you went from you're writing all these novels to then moving in the podcast space.
Yeah.
Fantasy podcast.
Totally. So this is funny because this is like the thing that drives my career is seeing interesting things and then saying, I want to do that. So that's how I started writing novels, because I was reading them all at a publishing house and I was like, well, these people are doing it. What's stopping me? So then I heard this podcast called The Unexplained Disappearance of Mars Patel.
Okay.
And adorable story. With kid actors and stuff, so we listened to it in the car with my kids, and I was like, who's writing this stuff? And then I found other podcasts out there that existed, and I just started doing research in that space, trying to find out what was out there. And it turned out that I knew someone from a previous life, like in the early 90s. I knew this woman whose boyfriend was in a band that a friend of mine was in.
Okay.
It turned out, was working for this company that was producing children's podcasts. And I just said, can I take you to lunch and find out what you're doing? So we had lunch, and she was like, pitch us something.
Oh, wow.
Because she had read my books and stuff, so she knew that I could write.
But there's something to be said by the type of person you are, that you didn't just stay in that space. That's what I know. It's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I do.
Yeah.
You saw something else.
Yeah.
You wanted to learn more about it, and you're like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Without the fear of, I don't do this.
Yeah.
That's something that's inspiring.
It was, I was proud of myself, actually.
You
that
should
I
be.
kind of made that pivot happen.
Yes, and you took yourself out of your comfort zone. You created and wrote Dream Breachers, which we've been starting to listen to.
Oh, wow.
I have an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. I was like, guys, I'm making dinner. Listen, and they're loving it.
Oh, good.
It's about a 12-year-old, I don't want to run this, 12-year-old boy who moves consciously between his dreams, realizes he can. Move consciously between his dreams and reality, and I have to blow you up for a second.
Yeah.
It was Webby honoree for outstanding podcast for family and children.
Yeah.
So you're not only doing it, but you're being awarded for your work.
I mean, what was great about Dream Breachers was that writing a novel is pretty solitary. It's just you at home.
Right.
And it takes a long time.
Right.
And with the podcast, there was, a great creative director at the company, and then there were producers, and then I was getting reels to listen to kid actors and stuff, so I was involved in the casting choices.
It's wildly different.
So collaborative and fun.
Do you love it?
I loved it, yes.
More than writing the books?
I think each story has a good format.
Okay.
And it's like finding the right match of what the story you want to tell and how you want to tell it.
Sure.
But that was another one. The idea for Dream Breachers came from my daughters.
Aww.
One of them had a dream. They wanted a dog so badly. I caved eventually.
I was going to say, did you cave?
I caved during the pandemic, but this was a couple of years.
Dog.
Yeah, before that, one of my daughters, I think it was Ellie, she came down to breakfast, and she was like, I had a dream that we got a dog. And I just said something obnoxious like, well, that's the only way you're getting one. And she said, yeah, it's too bad I didn't wake up with it, or something like that.
And you're
I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. Here's another idea.
I love listening to this because we all live in a world where we don't think like you. It's amazing getting in.
You probably have like 20 little novel ideas in your head, and you just don't know it.
Sure, but it takes the writer to be able to acknowledge and work through that, and then capture this idea that we're all in. It's a gift. You got a gift, Tara.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got a gift. That is amazing. Does writing for sound change the way you write your characters and your plot?
Absolutely. So,
How?
Well, what happened when they said pitch us something, the idea for Dream Breachers was just 2 paragraphs on my computer. And I thought maybe it would become a middle grade novel. But when I was asked to pitch for audio, I scrolled through like, what do I have kicking around?
Sure.
And immediately Dream Breachers just like raised its hand, like, me, because you can go anywhere in dreams. So for
a lot of ideas.
For audio,
Pretty
it's
cool.
perfect
Pretty
because
cool.
you can dream that you're in China or on a baseball field
yes.
or underwater.
A lot of ideas.
So the soundscape just was like right there. It was limitless. So I basically learned how to write for sound, kind of by listening to a lot of stuff and getting annoyed by the way people were doing things.
Yeah.
And then trying to avoid those, like trying to figure out workarounds to convey information only through sound without being, there's a lot of stuff out there where it's like, oh, gee, I stepped in mud. And it's like, no one talks like that. And most people don't like keep audio diaries on their phones or, there's all this stuff that happens in podcasts that's not real.
I have to be
it's
honest.
so dark in here.
Yeah.
It's like I played a game with myself where it's like tell me that it's dark without saying it's dark. And just like looking for more creative ways.
That's so true. You do narrow the audience when you speak like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you can keep an audience when you when you write like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep you're my diary right now. We are a big reading family. Mm-hmm. Not always a big podcast. We didn't always listen to audiobooks as much as I'd like to, and reading's very important.
Yeah.
When we started listening to Dream Breachers, it was like the boys were like staring at a wall, like listening, drool coming out. It's you really capture every moment.
I think there's something about a show like Dream Breachers where it's cast that's easier for kids to get excited about versus an audiobook where it's just someone reading it and trying to do a couple of voices or whatever.
Fair.
So the Dream Breachers kind of grew and grew so that the cast ended up getting bigger and stuff. And it's interesting because I never thought about writing fantasy for middle grade novels. Like it never occurred to me. That's why it was just sitting on my computer as an idea that I hadn't touched.
Cool.
Because the world building always intimidated me. But for some reason, once I got inspired to, do this for audio, then the world building just seemed more fun.
Yeah.
So I loved it. So I can't believe we did 3 seasons of it, and I'm really proud of it. And it's tricky because the whole podcast landscape has changed, and now people aren't producing shows like that right now.
Why? Why do you think?
Money. It's expensive to make a show like that.
Okay.
And that company, Pinna, was great because it was subscription based.
Smart.
So you were kind of everything, but it was behind a paywall, so you're limiting.
True.
So they started like pushing out the first season out of the paywall so that other people would come back. But people haven't really figured out how to monetize kids' entertainment.
I was going to say, what's happening now or what's next in that space for kids?
I don't really know.
You got to figure it out.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone has really figured out what's happening. There's a lot of like IP kind of stuff happening where, there's a podcast that's inspired by Dora the Explorer, and people are relying more on known properties, which is
safe.
Fun, but it's safer. So it's kind of, I had a couple of other ideas for shows that I would want to write next, and I haven't been able to land them anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, I just think it's important that we really just that space, that reading space, listening, active listening. I think it's really important in an age of so much technology.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, you didn't just stay there. You've written a number of satires and essays that received critical acclaim, went viral. Let's talk about satires for a sec.
Okay.
They can be tough. People don't always get the joke.
People don't always get the joke.
So I love satire. I don't know if you've known, just in the brief time we've been speaking, love a good satire. Have you been surprised by any of the reactions in some of your work?
It's funny, I've only had negative comments on one thing that I wrote. And it was a thing I wrote called 50 Reasons to Postpone or to Reschedule Your Colonoscopy.
Colonoscopy.
Yeah. And
Why did that hit a chord?
because I had rescheduled my colonoscopy 20 times, and I was like, this is hilarious. And then my friends were rescheduling, because when you turn 50, everyone's like, oh, this is on your to-do list now. So I wrote a piece of satire that I thought was like, the whole point was the reasons got increasingly ridiculous.
Okay.
So I was making fun of the fact that people are looking for any excuse.
It's not a fun experience.
Right.
We get it.
Actually, it's not the worst because you're asleep. It's a good nap, as someone wrote an essay.
It's funny, my
about.
husband said it was the best rest he'd ever done.
No, totally. A woman wrote an essay that's like, my colonoscopy was the nap I didn't know I needed.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel that.
Yeah.
But I got some comments that were like, this is not funny. Colonoscopies are very serious and people need to get them. I was like, I know. So that's where the joke didn't really land.
Okay, I think if that is the only reaction you've gotten out of all the satire, I think you're doing really well.
What's interesting, though, is that the market for satire is so limited that I end up just like sending stuff to McSweeney's, sending stuff to the New Yorker, then you get a rejection either immediately or in like 6 months, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll just put it up on the internet on Medium or whatever. So it doesn't get a lot. I don't know why I spend time doing it.
I think you need to, and we're going to get into that. I think it's really important because your two satires, Welcome to New York City High School Admissions, and You Survived New York City High School Admissions, really.
Yeah.
Did they both go viral?
They did.
They should. I will tell you why it resonated, in my opinion, but why do you think it resonated with so many New Yorkers?
Because this system is insane. And I think that if people don't always get satire, this is like, it's satire already.
Yeah.
Like, it's so crazy that it feels like you're living a joke.
Yeah.
So I think that everyone just needed that kind of.
Tara, you are just a woman of the people. Like we've spoken about New York City high school admissions because I've just gone through it. So it comes up, and we're like, nobody understands. This is crazy. You don't understand. A million programs. It's a job. But your kids like going through pressure that people in other states don't feel. We feel like we're in this bubble that only New York City people can feel or going through. But then non-writers can't really express except this is crazy. This is ridiculous. We're going through a trauma that we can't even put words into. And then here comes these satires that you wrote, and it was everything we needed we weren't crying, we were actually laughing for the first time.
It was
like
wild.
Hysterical. You just encompassed every feeling, and then you made us laugh about it.
Yeah, it was so fun.
It was like PTSD, like really, it was literally healing for all of us.
It was wild. Like, I was getting texts from people, and like my husband's former coworkers were like, is this your wife? Somebody just texted me to this. Like, it really just went out there.
I read one of them, and I was like, hey, Tara, we don't know each other, but I need you to come sit on this couch with me immediately.
And you want to know what's funny? Both of those pieces I wrote like in an hour and then polished them up, because when you have an idea for something that's really going to be a perfect topic to skewer, it just comes out perfectly.
Yeah.
And I just went through every crazy aspect of, and there are many, of the admissions, and just figured out a way to
I just kept laughing harder and harder and harder. You literally, what you did, that's why satire and essays are really so important. So don't stop doing them.
Okay.
I read a number of your essays, and you just have this way of being funny, but also being very vulnerable in your writing that really speak to people. So whether they've experienced it or not, they're now in it with you, however long you've written that essay, along that journey with you. And it's a real gift. So don't stop writing it.
Okay.
Don't stop.
Okay.
I mean, you need to keep writing more. We need it.
Okay.
We need more of your writing.
What's funny is every time I write a piece of satire, and this has been for years now, I send it to McSweeney's just to see. And I've never gotten anything through. And I usually get, their rejections are really funny. They just say like, hey, thanks for letting us have a look, but we're not going to take it. Thanks for sending this my way, but it's not right for us. And so I got into this like game with myself. This is so petty of me that
I'm loving it already.
every time I got a rejection from McSweeney's, you're only allowed to send one thing at a time to all these places.
Okay.
I just would immediately send the next thing.
Good.
Yeah, like I would get the no, and then I would submit something, and then I would get the no, and I would submit something
And
else.
look at how much traction all of these no's are getting you. So they're clearly the temperature of what the people want.
Reading
something's
stuff,
off.
yeah, they don't have a kid. They like I don't know who Chris was the last one who rejected everything.
Chris,
if you're
come on,
watching,
buddy.
and no, Chris is not watching.
Come on, Chris. Chris is watching.
But I realized that I was being really immature and that I don't need validation from McSweeney's. This was after like the New York City school stuff hit. I was like, I don't need McSweeney's to validate me. So after that got rejected by McSweeney's, I just wrote back and said, thanks, Chris, it's been real. And I've never submitted anything to them again. And I probably can't now until someone else takes over the job there. But I was just like, what am I doing?
Good for you.
Yeah, I was like, I don't need McSweeney's to put a stamp of approval.
Good for you. You need to, there's a massive community on Facebook for New York City parents going through this process that is really, really helpful. You need to repost that every year.
I will.
You have no. You have to.
I will. It feels like an obligation.
It's an obligation.
Yeah.
It's who. Yes, you were put on this earth too.
Yeah.
Right. Do you feel like you need to pick a lane as a writer, or are you comfortable? It seems like you've made these creative shifts into being a novelist, an essayist. Are you comfortable with that?
I am always looking for a new lane, and I'm never going to pick one. And I think that it's partly that it's just, like I said, I get ideas and they take different forms or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of like, it's hard to make a living as a novelist, and it's fun to have like then other things that I'm doing.
Yes.
I also, you're going to laugh, but my Coney Island book, Dreamland Social Club, my husband and I started adapting it into a musical during the pandemic.
I'm not going to laugh at that. That's incredible. I love musicals.
Okay, so I have musical theater children. So I grew up going to a Broadway show maybe once a year with my parents. But in recent years, because my kids are really they do musical theater, both of them, we go to see Broadway shows all the time. And I play the lotteries to win the cheap tickets like daily. So my husband historically doesn't really like musicals. He thinks it's kind of hokey when people just start, break into song or whatever. But when we saw Hadestown as a family right before the pandemic, he was just like blown away. And when we were in isolation, you talk a lot about like, what do you value? We were also coming up on turning 50, and we decided to try to do something together. So we're done. We wrote a musical.
Oh, that's incredible.
So we've started submitting it to some like development labs to try to get that out there.
That's exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm not picking a lane anytime soon.
Well, you also brought up a Broadway play, and you can submit for a free ticket, a lottery. And didn't you get tickets to see a Broadway play recently?
Oh, just last week I won the Sunset Boulevard lottery twice.
That's incredible. How did you do that?
So it's just totally luck. You just have to enter all the time, whether you think you can go or not.
Yeah.
And then when you win, and they're not free, they're cheaper.
Cheaper, excuse me.
When you win, then you're like, oh, actually I could go to a musical today.
Isn't it funny how you're like, can I actually do it now?
Yeah. No, and I won it last Wednesday for the matinee, and I was like, no, I can't do that. I have to take my daughter to the orthodontist. But then I won it again the next day, and I texted him.
You actually went to the orthodontist? That's impressive.
What do you mean?
You didn't cancel.
No. I mean, I didn't buy the tickets for the show because I was like, I have to go to the orthodontist.
Yeah, good.
Because I'm like, that's my life. Rescheduling the orthodontist
It's the worst.
It's so right. It's like impossible.
It is. It's the worst.
So
and you're going every 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll win again, and I won the next day.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
But you just have to. You have to enter all of them, whether or not you think you can go.
All of them.
Because life changes, and then suddenly you're like, oh.
Right.
So we went, my husband and I saw Sunset Boulevard the other
you.
day. And I'm so glad we did.
I hear it's a great
It's so
play.
mesmerizing.
Yeah, I have a friend who's in the pit playing French horn.
Oh, no way.
But everyone who goes, loves this play.
Yeah.
Is there any New York City literary spot, library that has played a role in your journey?
I wish I had a good answer
I know.
for that. I don't. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say
that.
like the Strand or, you know.
Okay, is there any spot in New York City that inspires your creativity? You go there and it means something to you, or you're...
Not in New York, except for Coney Island. I really need the ocean. The ocean is like
I feel that.
important. Like I take my kids to the Jersey Shore at least for a day or two every summer. We call it the pilgrimage because it's just like I need that.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. But other than that, like New York is such a crazy city. I don't write in cafes. Like I'm not one of those people who goes and sits with a laptop and coffee for several hours.
I don't understand that either.
I can't do it. There's too much going on.
Too much going on. Oh, well, that leads me to my next question. New York City is full of creativity, but full of distractions. Where do you write?
So I write just in a room in my house that's not even a closed office. It's like kind of our den.
Yeah.
And I have a little desk by the front window where I can see what's going on the street. And it's the least glamorous kind of setup that you can imagine.
You can focus.
But I can, well, mostly. My husband works at home. I wish we had one more room.
Yeah.
With soundproofing.
Sure.
Because he works at home, so he's on calls a lot.
Oh.
So that's kind of annoying.
Do you wear headphones?
You know, I go through phases where I like really listening to music when I'm writing, but then sometimes I'm just not.
Yeah.
I need a different kind of focus and I don't want to be distracted by music.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely, you know, I have friends who have offices that they write in. I have a lot of novelist friends. And
Of course you do.
Yeah,
Writers hang out with their writer friends.
Yeah, I never knew, and I think this is something unique to New York, that you can live here and be a novelist and you don't feel that special because you know like 30 other novelists.
That's really funny.
There was a group of writers who got together starting probably back in like 2007 or so. And it was a teen author drinks night. And it was once a month, and we would go down to this bar, Sweet and Vicious in Soho. And
Been there.
it went out of business.
I know.
Last week.
Last week?
Or 2 weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought it was a long time ago.
No, it literally closed 2 days
sad.
before we had the 20th anniversary
I'm
of Teen
sorry.
Author Drinks Nights.
Oh,
we were
I'm
going
sorry.
there.
Oh, that's like really sad.
And it wasn't there. It
Oh.
had closed 2 days before.
That stinks.
So we ended up across the street, but it was...
Staring at it.
Yeah. We're like, oh, remember when we were young and we were having drinks over there?
Yeah.
But there were like, I walked into the bar and I looked around. It's like 15 novelists, and we were all still working, which is great.
That's really impressive.
But yeah, I'm sure if you're like a novelist in a smaller city or a smaller town, you're like the only one, or there's like 4 of you.
Well,
Whereas like in New York City, there's like...
Yeah. Well, New York City just brings the best of everything.
Yeah.
Which also leads to it being so competitive and hard to get through that oversaturated environment that you've placed yourself in. How do you think you've broken through?
I don't know. I think that it's interesting a challenge of living in New York as a creative person, I'm sure not just as a novelist, is that you can compare yourself to other people.
Sure.
And you can see what their house is like and who's on the New York Times bestseller list. And it kind of makes you, I haven't like broken out to the same level that a lot of my friends have, where they have Netflix TV shows and adaptations of their books and stuff.
Okay.
So when you're surrounded by people who are like quote unquote more successful than you, it's kind of challenging sometimes to just like remember that I have also succeeded.
Yes.
Because the bar is higher when you're surrounded by people who are really reaching a different level of success that I know is partly hard work, partly luck. The Leaving was optioned for television for a while. And
Wow. I could see that.
then, it was going to be reset in Australia. It was optioned by Margot Robbie's company. And then the pandemic. Yeah.
We got to resurrect that.
I know. Hopefully, I mean, you never know. You really do never know.
You don't know.
People pluck books that are old, and then all of a sudden they're new again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like I came close, and I know a lot of people who have also come close, and then people who have had movies and it hasn't like changed their life.
Sure.
So their book was made into a movie, and people can watch it, but it's not like they're like, set for life or whatever.
Yeah. What advice would you give to the person who wants to come to New York City and and become a writer?
Don't come to New York City.
Great. Great. Remember
No,
that.
I mean, of course you can, but it's certainly not necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, because especially now with people so open to Zooms and how that's so easy.
So you don't think New York City opens more doors?
No, I don't.
Connections?
I don't think that being here opens any doors at all.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you're someone who's writing a novel, the way to get an agent is not through trying to show up at weird bookstore events or whatever and hope there's an agent there.
Okay.
The way to get an agent is you look at books that you love that feel similar to what you're trying to do,
Yes.
and then you look at the acknowledgments and you see who the agent is, and then you try to reach out to them
Right.
with a query letter for
Right.
what you're doing.
Right.
Publishing doesn't have as many high-profile events or things as it used to.
Fair. Yeah.
And like there's organizations like the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators that have events in New York. Maybe come for that, but certainly don't move here,
How does someone know they're ready? I'm ready to reach out
Well, I think...
and show my work.
That's a tricky question because people aren't always right when they think they're ready.
Right. So how do you know?
Well, the way to do it is if you think you're ready, you have to do it. And then if you get feedback that's not great, pause and recorrect.
Yeah.
You don't say well, they didn't like it, I'm going to send it to 50 more people. You should take the feedback to heart and really think about is there a revision I should do before I even try with the next person?
How is that rejection? I mean, so there are certain kinds of occupations that deal with that more often. You are pouring your heart and soul on paper, and you're believing in it, and you're months, years, and then this is your baby. You're submitting it, and someone's like, "We're good." How do people deal with that?
I think you just get used to it after a while.
Okay.
I've learned not to take it personally.
Smart, yeah.
And that certain things are just, I've had projects that didn't land anywhere at a publishing house, and it's half of the time it's we have something in progress already that's kind of too similar.
Timing.
Yeah, there's timing things. And then, also I've written some really great books, and then there are other books that I feel like if I had taken longer, or I could have just skipped that book. The world didn't really need that book.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you what those books are.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, you're not going to.
Because you should still buy them.
Yes, exactly.
But sometimes you get a rejection and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe this isn't working.
Sure, and I love those stories where you hear people were rejected a million times, but they still believed in that particular project.
Yeah.
Maybe this is more on the minority side, and they push through. And it's kind of like your essay satire, journey where you're sending it in, and some people are like, "Oh no, not right now," and it's going viral. Right. So
totally.
It's just that person.
And it's funny because with the high school satire, it's of course McSweeney's really wasn't going to pick it up because it's too inside baseball. It's you really have to understand how crazy the system is to really get the joke.
That is very New York City centric. And trust me, there are plenty of people, thousands and thousands of people who get the jokes. So it was worth it.
Yeah.
This is maybe a loaded question, but I did want to end here. What do you want people to remember you and your work for?
So that's interesting. I remember once I was doing a reading, and it was Dreamland Social Club. And someone asked maybe a similar kind of question, and I remember thinking, and I think I ended up saying it, that after I finished writing that book, I had the thought that I could die now. It was a long time ago. So.
Yes, yeah. But I get it.
And it was because it just felt like kind of a magical, unique book that about mother loss and about New York City, and kind of, it felt like super personal. Like my mother passed away when I was in high school, and my first young adult novel was a very kind of autobiographical kind of story that was like that.
Yeah.
And that was written where the character is like really raw because it just happened. And I love that book too. But when I wrote Dreamland Social Club, I felt like I was going back, this was years later, to the mother loss concept, but kind of building it out bigger in terms of just loss and nostalgia in general.
Yeah.
And using that as a lens to see Coney Island and Coney Island history through. So it felt like upping my game.
Yeah.
Like I was writing something very personal, but it also had, there's a gentrification development plot happening too. Like it just like was like the first book where I felt like I was not just writing quiet coming of age, that there was something else to it. And I feel that way about The Leaving too, that there's something deeper going on there. So I don't know. I think like I don't know what the like takeaway would be if someone like really kind of sat down and looked at my body of work and analyzed it. But I do think that for my daughter, certainly, like writing stories where it's like the lesson is like, you're going to be fine and that life is beautiful. Yeah. So maybe that.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate us getting a glimpse of what it's like, the writer's mind. You are the first person to sit here and share that with us, so I really appreciate
Well,
that.
if you want more writers, I know a lot of them.
Sure you do. I'm going to come to that drinks across the street from Sweet
totally.
Vicious.
Yeah,
and
they'll
just
be
start
lining
talking.
up.
It's such a beauty. The way your mind works is so beautiful, so thank you so much.